Good morning, dear colleagues, partners and friends. My name is Liene and I am manager of Fintech Latvia Association. And today we meet on the first and definitely not the last Fintech Breakfast networking event. Our intention with creating this event was to have a friendly environment where we could discuss various trends and sometimes also difficulties in the industry in a friendly environment over a coffee and croissant. So what is on our today's agenda? Today we will deep dive into IPO. And we will look into why to do IPO, who is it suitable for, is it difficult or is it on the contrary not difficult at all. And today we have invited two or even three very nice guests that will come here in a short while with two keynotes. First, BDO Law will talk a little bit about tax and legal aspects of IPO. And I will be joined here on the stage by Dainis Vodolagins, who is Senior Tax Manager, and Sabīne Smilts, who is Legal Associate. And afterwards, we also have invited Liene Dubava, who is member of the Management Board of Nasdaq Riga, who will share their experience with going through IPOs. And after these two keynotes, we will have a friendly panel discussion where we will be joined by one of our members, DelfinGroup, and it will be represented by Dainis Vodolagins, and Dainis will share how was it in real life to undergo this process. But before we start, one short commercial break. We also would like to everyone to know that we are welcoming you to join our event on 27th of October, where we will be launching our Outlook magazine, The Pulse of Fintech Latvia. So please follow our social accounts and join for the event in October. But now I give the floor to Dainis Vodolagins, please.
Good morning, dear guests. It's a pleasure to see you this morning here and spend some time in this friendly environment, chatting with each other and talking about possibly some equity financing options. To make a brief introduction about our organization, so we today here with my colleagues Sabīne represent a professional organization called BDO. So we have turned recently 15 in Latvia. We provide a broad scope of services, everything including legal, tax services, audit, assurance, and outsource. So these are us who are welcomed by you today, Sabīne and Dainis. So feel free to contact us later if you wish. And we are representing a global organization, so we have opportunity to also use our experience from other countries and to get some background from colleagues also in other jurisdictions, not only in Latvia, to cover different topics. And the core topic of discussion and presentation today would be financing strategies, more specifically speaking about equity transactions, equity investments. So I think that most of you here in the audience do know quite a lot probably about debt financing and bonds. So I think that was quite a trend in fintech industry for a while. But there have been quite few specifically equity-oriented transactions. So just to give a very brief overview of what we are going to discuss today. So obviously, one of the first things which come to mind talking about equity investments would be an initial public offering. Broadly speaking, this is a way how to allow a broad number of investors to invest in the share capital of a company. This is typically associated with significant costs of organizing the process. That's at least a bias in the industry. So mostly speaking of IPO, first of all, costs related to the process come to mind. So we'll try to maybe defeat that bias today and show that it's not really that maybe expensive, and the benefits are outweighing the costs of the process, administrative and other. There is a number of questions to consider when doing an IPO from technical perspective, meaning how to structure the share issue, what classes of shares to issue, what rights to provide to different classes of shares, and this is this also is related to valuation of a company and valuation of the shares being issued on the market. A number of different processes need to be also implemented, so Sabīne will discuss on IPO technicalities in more detail later. But just to simply, very briefly represent the idea is that there's a company, typically joint stock company, which is issuing some additional shares. So the existing shareholders, they typically stay with the classes of shares they have. And the new classes of shares issued to public is being issued as additional share capital. Speaking of equity and maybe looking more from like business owner's perspective, so IPO is one of the options to raise money, but it's oriented for the company who is doing IPO itself. For certain other business owners, it might be interesting to discuss also not doing the IPO, but actually exiting the business and using the funds to maybe launch some other new operations. So this is a different approach, but this is also something being discussed in the market, and this is an opportunity for business owners basically to consider how they can proceed, because maybe some businesses have outgrown already and they are at the stage where it's maybe logical to sell part or all shares of the company. So obviously finding and attracting an investor is one of key aspects of this process, and the difference with the IPO obviously is that the proceeds are being normally received by the shareholders. So it's very simply technically represented, but it could be a holding company on top, could be different structures. So this is more like a way how the owners themselves can obtain funds to maybe launch different operations instead of attracting funding to the company itself. And last but not least, maybe some instrument which is not very popular on the market, and but it's worth mentioning that for companies attracting investments, there is also this opportunity in place. It's typically being provided by some high-risk mezzanine investment funds. So mezzanine investment is a hybrid type of investment which bears both prerequisites of debt and equity financing. So it is normally very risky, but it's also very rewarding. So the interest borne on this type of financing is very high, and it's normally associated with some specific project which company is realizing. So this is also an interesting opportunity just for to understand the sort of the whole spectrum. So we are not talking about debt financing today, but obviously there is also a debt market available for you. And I would like now to pass to Sabīne to discuss a bit more on entering Nasdaq.
Yeah, correct. Thank you, Dainis. Good morning, everyone. So I will talk a little bit about advantages and disadvantages of entering Nasdaq. So we have prepared a chart where we wrote some of the arguments which came into our mind when we thought about these questions. However, please take into consideration that this chart it's not complete. There are many more aspects which exist. And if we're talking about advantages, then capital market instruments, we can look at them as an alternative to bank financing. Therefore, one of the biggest advantages is to attract financing on own terms. Of course, when a company enters Nasdaq, it improves the reputation of the company. It improves the recognition. And a company may also create a stock option program for employees. If we're talking about disadvantages, then we need to understand that if a company enters Nasdaq, it creates costs. It creates costs regarding inclusion fee and annual fee as well. When we are preparing a company for going to a stock exchange, it's a relatively time-consuming process, and of course, it creates additional costs. And depending on what kind of market a company wants to enter, there are also some specific requirements, for example, regarding financial reports. And as all of us know, there are two types of markets. There is a First North market and main market. And now I shortly will talk about the differences between those two markets. So let's start with the First North market. So the First North market, it's a market where it's easier to get in, because if we look at the requirements, then we see that there is no minimum period of companies' operating experience. There is no minimum market value of the company. There isn't a situation that always needs to prepare a prospectus. There may be situations when a company, a description can be prepared. So those requirements, they are a bit easier to catch if we compare it with main market. And therefore, let's go to the main market, where we see that, for example, regarding companies' operating experience, it needs to be at least 2 or 3 years. It depends whether we're talking about bonds or shares. Also, there are requirements for market value of the company, and many more, which you can see also in this chart. And as I already mentioned, if a company enters market, it needs to understand that it creates costs. Here I wrote those costs which are valid for right now regarding First North market. And for example, as you can see, for example, shares admission fee, it's 3,000 euro, for example. And if we compare it with main market costs, then we see that shares admission fee for the main market, it's quite higher. It's 9,200. So therefore, you see that the costs for the main market, they're quite higher, and not only regarding shares, but also regarding bonds. Now I will give the floor to my colleague Dainis, who can continue. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Sabīne. So just few examples on what has been done on our market in terms of the IPOs, and unfortunately it's not a very large list to put on the screen. Speaking of recent years, there are 3 companies mentioned here which are Latvian, and if we take a look at the raised capital amount, so they have been resulting very close one to another, which is probably some indicator also for other market players that raising around 8 million euro in IPO is probably something which can be achieved quite realistically. So 2 of the companies went for Baltic main list, that's Indexo and DelfinGroup, and then Virši went for First North and also has reached quite a good result in the subscription. But also, as you see, there are examples of raising quite a substantial amount of money. So this is obviously a different scale of business, and they cannot be compared directly. But just to understand that it is pretty much no limit. So basically, it depends really on valuation, on the business plans, and on the plans how the funds attracted will be used. Regarding some M&A activities, I cannot really name a lot of what we call exits, but there is, for example, one complete exit went, for example, a taco business. So I understand it's not fintech, and unfortunately I cannot bring examples from recent like fintech activities. But for example, this was a sale of business completely in Latvia, quite successful. So it's confidential regarding the amount, and it's not been made public. The rest are also the companies mentioned here, but they are obviously known to everyone. So this is just that there are big businesses also raising substantial investments in so-called series of investments from various consortiums of investors and investment funds. So there is the activity on the market is going on, and it's becoming more topical to speak and to discuss. And we actually hope that the businesses would also be more active on this attraction of funds, because this has been discussed quite a lot, and it's now time to actually maybe act. And just to also briefly discuss on how you can try and see, so to say, have a small teaser of how it would be to go public. There is such an opportunity. Sabīne, could you tell us please more about Sandbox?
Yeah, thank you, Dainis. So the Financial and Capital Market Commission has created a support mechanism for companies that intend to raise funding in the Latvian capital market. It includes non-financial advice. As a result, a potential issuer receives an assessment and recommendations on what that potential issuer needs to do, what the company needs to improve in order to enter the Latvian capital market. And if we are talking about this program, then we can split it into 6 steps. The first step is that the potential issuer needs to submit the application and all the required documents. And afterwards, the Financial and Capital Market Commission it reviews those documents. If necessary, then it asks for more information, for more documents. And then in the second step, the application could either be rejected, or they could conclude with the third step, in which within 30 days, those submitted documents would be reviewed, and an assessment of readiness of the potential issuer will be drawn up. And afterwards, in the fourth step, the potential issuer will receive an offer from the working group members, which he could reject or accept. And if that company decides to accept this offer, then they start to prepare all the necessary documentation for entering Nasdaq. Yes, and afterwards, if everything is okay, then the sixth step is to enter the Latvian capital market. This program, this security sandbox, it's till the fourth step where potential issuer receives an offer. It's for free. Therefore, every single company who thinks of an opportunity to enter the stock exchange could use it and could understand whether the company is ready to get into the Nasdaq. Yeah, and that's all from us. Thank you everyone for your attention, and yeah.
Thank you, Sabīne. Thank you very much. I think it was quite insightful and very informative.